YTBC. This is your boy Coach Shelton Harrison. And in this video, I'm going to take the time to address this Luiz Ortiz versus Bryant Jennings fight, okay? I don't call this a debauchery. I call it a debauchery in the Jennings camp because I'm going to explain to you how Bryant Jennings knocked his own self out. And that's just the way that is, okay? People, this fight I thought it was a pretty entertaining fight. And I guess I'm dropping my response video to this fight so late because, well, I just didn't make the video, okay? And that's just the way that is. Okay, but I watched the fight, enjoyed the fight, thoroughly enjoyed the fight. Luis Ortiz, I have to give Luis Ortiz full respect and full props for this win. I got to, okay? Because he, bested a hungry young lion. He bested him in Bryant Jennings, okay? Initially, I didn't make a prediction video on this fight, but I did think that Bryant Jennings probably would have beaten Luis Ortiz. At least that's what I thought, okay? Because I looked at the age factor, and, I seen Luis Ortiz fight a couple other times, and yeah, he was knocking guys out and putting them down, but it's just the age, and Luis Ortiz isn't very mobile. So I kind of thought that Bryant Jennings would, use his boxing ability to pick him apart. But I never thought that Bryant Jennings would try to stand and be so stupid and to go toe to toe with one Luis Ortiz. Okay? It's got to be the dumbest thing that I've ever seen on God's green earth. And you know what? There are two people to blame for this knockout. There are two people to blame for this knockout. The first person I blame for this knockout is Bryant Jennings. The second person that I blame is that buffoon of a trainer in John David Jackson. I used to regard John David Jackson really as one of the top trainers. I used to highly regard him, but now I'm not really so sure because, you would have think that John David Jackson would have told Bryant Jennings, hey, Bryant Jennings, let me tell you something. Let me explain something to you. Don't go in head first when you try to throw your punches at Luis Ortiz. Don't go in head first. You would think that, John David Jackson, the buffoon of a trainer, would have told Bryant Jennings to make the adjustments, but he didn't. And what did Luis Ortiz do? The savvy veteran that he is, he was patient, he took his time, and he set up his shots, and he waited on Bryant Jennings to come in head first, and he kept catching Bryant Jennings with uppercuts. But did John David Buffoon tell Bryant Jennings to make an adjustment? No, of course he didn't. Of course he did not. And I know some of you John David Jackson fans, I know y'all not going to like this. I know that you're going to say, Coach, you're just being hard on John David Jackson. I know that you're going to say this, but we can't get around the facts. John David Jackson didn't tell him to stop coming in head first. He didn't tell him that. No, he didn't. And why in the hell would Bryant Jennings stand in the chest of one Luis Ortiz and go toe to toe? What the hell was he thinking, y'all? YTBC, what was he thinking? I can't even imagine what this man, it just baffled me. Luis Ortiz wasn't even in the best shape. You know who Luis Ortiz remind me of? He really does remind me of a modern-day George Foreman. He's built like George Foreman, and he throws those glancing blows like George Foreman throws. Okay? See, you know what Luis Ortiz did? He knew he wasn't in great shape, so what did he do? He kind of played the cat and mouse game. He played possum. He waited on Bryant Jennings to commit to his offense, and Luis Ortiz just countered Bryant Jennings every chance he got. Bryant Jennings made himself look like a damn fool in this fight, y'all. He looked like a fool. And 'tis the holiday season for Bryant Jennings. 'Tis the holiday season to be jolly. Fa la 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 la, la 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 la, Bryant Jennings. But I must say, you got to be singing that song in your sleep because Luis Ortiz damn near put you to sleep. Bryant Jennings, what were you thinking about this? And John David Jackson, How are you going to explain this? I mean, but he's supposed to be this great trainer. I was never sold on John David Jackson. I was never sold on him, period. Just wasn't sold. Now, I do have to admit, I think that John David Jackson is very good for Sergey Kovalev. I believe this. Okay, and I think that Sergey has taken to John David Jackson and he's listening. But I think John David Jackson coaches Sergey Kovalev better than he did Bryant Jennings. Because Bryant Jennings, hell, for some reason, he not listening. And John David Jackson, for some reason, you didn't take the time to tell Bryant Jennings that, hey, you silly bastard, what are you doing? You're going in head first against a power puncher who is going to uppercut the hell out of you. I mean, did they even watch any videos of Luiz Ortiz? And I almost got to say no, based on what I saw in this fight. I don't think Bryant Jennings looked at any video on Luiz Ortiz. And people, that's just the way that is. You can like this video, you can don't like this video, but you got to sit down and listen to facts, y'all. You got to listen to the facts. Bryant Jennings didn't execute any game plan. He didn't have a game plan. His game plan was to go in head first. His game plan was to lay his head in the chest of one Luiz Ortiz and just to stand there and go toe-to-toe with a power puncher who you know has knockout punching power ability. Where was the adjustment? When did you tell him to make that adjustment, John David Jackson? Because I'm listening to what you're telling him in the corner, and you didn't tell him to stop bringing that water-ass head into those punches. You didn't tell him, John David Jackson. And John David Jackson, you got some explaining to do. You got some explaining to do, John David Jackson. I can't let him off the hook, y'all. I can't let this man off the hook because he did not instruct his man correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Bryant Jennings, I also blame you because I don't even think you were listening. And maybe in John David Jackson's defense, maybe he told Bryant Jennings in training camp, listen, don't you get your water-ass head ducking into those punches. Don't you come in head first with that big-ass head. Because if you do, Bryant Jennings, you're going to get yourself knocked out. Maybe John David Jackson told him this in training camp. And maybe Bryant Jennings don't listen. But I tell you, Bryant Jennings, you helped your own self get knocked out. You knocked yourself out. And that's just the way that is, guys. This is your boy, Coach Shelton Harrison. Congratulations, Luiz Ortiz, on your 7-round stoppage of Bryant Jennings. And that's just the way that is. I'm done.